Boy, am I tired. I am just so tired of Steve Kerr. Steph Curry makes his return, and Steve Kerr immediately finds a way to screw everything up. Before the game even started, I saw who he elected to start, and I knew the Warriors were immediately compromised. I think of the game of basketball at the highest level, which is the NBA, a physical warfare in the form of a game. The players go out there and put it on the line every single night. They put their livelihoods on the line, they put their reputations on the line, they put their physicality on the line, and they put their health and well-being on the line when they play the game of basketball in general, but especially at the highest level, at the speed and the size that they play this game at the NBA level. And that means the leader of your team, that being Steve Kerr in this case, or any coach, that is the general of the army, and the general has to come up with a perfect, flawless plan so that all of his pieces are in maximum position to succeed. But Steve Kerr does things that is the complete opposite of optimization. The things that he does, it's almost as if he is a spy, an espionage, somebody who has infiltrated the team to find a way to absolutely put out the worst combination of pieces possible so that the team has a really hard time succeeding, and basically puts in a handicap so that his soldiers have to overcome said handicap to win the overall battle. And that is exactly what ended up happening in this game. That is what has been happening for the last 4 years at least. And even in the KD years, they had to constantly overcome the deficits and the stupidity of Steve Kerr. And now that the talent is not overwhelming anymore, the team simply hasn't been able to overcome these ridiculous handicaps that have been put in place by Steve Kerr. I want you guys to take a look at the tweet that I posted when I found out what the starting lineup was for this game against the Timberwolves, playing without Anthony Edwards. And before this starting lineup was announced, I was confident that the Warriors would be able to take care of business with or without Anthony Edwards, because we've learned over the last 3 games that Quinton Post, Trayce Jackson-Davis, Gui Santos, when those guys are all out there, it creates an imposing defense for the Warriors. And that's what they've been doing for the last 3 games, even without Steph Curry and some of it without Jimmy Butler, as well as Draymond Green, Al Horford, etc. And now that Kuminga is out of the equation, I had no reason to think that Gui Santos would suddenly not play in this game. We all would expect Gui Santos to be in rotation and playing something like at least 20 minutes, especially with Draymond out of the equation. But no. Steve Kerr decided to abuse the Pat Spencer situation and put him next to Steph Curry in the starting lineup with Buddy Hield as small forward. And let me explain to you exactly what is wrong with that. But before I do, if you like the content so far, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that like button so that this video gets out to all the Warriors fans out there. And if you use social media, be sure to share this video because it's going to explain in perfect detail exactly what Steve Kerr is doing wrong. And it is the most obvious sabotage on the planet if you understand the game of basketball and how the lineups must be formulated in order for that team to succeed, and how you can formulate a lineup to make sure that that team is completely and utterly failing. That is what Steve Kerr did for this game. So let's establish some order here. Pat Spencer is a point guard and a point guard only. Steph Curry, at almost 38 years old, is also a point guard and a point guard only. Given the fact that he's almost 38 years old, you have to do everything in your power to ensure that you put a protective lineup around Steph Curry, because you know you can rely on him on offense. You have to fortify the lineup around him to make sure that he is well protected on the defensive end of the floor. Now, when you put Pat Spencer and Curry in the starting lineup at the same time, you are effectively running 2 point guards on the floor at the same time. You are missing a defender there. And Pat Spencer can coexist in a team defensive scheme as the point guard, as well as Steph Curry. When he's at the point guard spot, his defense is highly underrated. However, if you put him at the shooting guard spot, where he is grossly undersized at 6'3", there is a deficit there. There's a reason Monte Ellis said from the get-go that he and Steph Curry would never work. It's because he understood that 2 small guards in the backcourt at the same time has no defense. And if you don't have defense, you can never be a serious team. And if you are going to do that, well, the 3 forwards that follow better be big ass players. But did Steve Kerr do that? No, he did not. he put 6'4" Buddy Hield at the small forward spot. And now the Warriors are running a point guard masquerading as a shooting guard at age 38, and they have a shooting guard in Buddy Hield masquerading as a small forward at the small forward position. Now you are running a 3-guard lineup and you are completely vulnerable on the defensive end of the floor. There is no rebounding there. There is very little POA ability there. Remember the good old days when 6'7" Klay Thompson was their shooting guard and he was an elite POA? And remember when Harrison Barnes, a big 6'8" guy, 230 pounds, was at small forward, making the Warriors defense very imposing and very big? Well, those days are long over. Steve Kerr has been sabotaging this team for years and years and years. And at least when he typically runs a 3-guard lineup, he has other guards on the floor, but at least they're capable on the defensive end of the floor. Moses Moody is a POA. Melton is a POA. GP2 is a POA. Will Richard is a POA. None of those guys are anywhere near to be found. Somehow in Steve Kerr's mind, Buddy Hield is winning the competition among all those guys. And then of course you have Jimmy Butler at the 4. You're small across the board. You have zero defense out in the perimeter with these 3 guys. And then you're also putting Jimmy Butler, 36 years old, out of position, starting him at the power forward spot. And now he has to deal with a much bigger Julius Randle, which is not a good matchup for him. Again, if you are the general of an army, you need to put your pieces in the strongest positions possible, and that would be Jimmy Butler at the shooting guard spot or the small forward spot, where generally he is the one with a size advantage, and Jimmy Butler thrives when he has that size advantage because he's a post-up player. So you take away the powers of Jimmy Butler on the offensive end of the floor, and then you force him to have to be taxed and be guarding Julius Randle all day and night. So literally, outside of Pat Spencer, everybody is out of position at this point. And Pat Spencer has filled in admirably. His story is awesome. But starting him and compromising the entire team in the process, the entire team's defense, is complete and utter malpractice. And it is completely and utterly nothing short of sabotage. And then you have Quinton Post at the center spot being asked to protect all of this. He has a handful to deal with Rudy Gobert as it is. But no, now you're asking him to protect an impossible lineup. Given the fact that Jimmy Butler is also capable of playing the shooting guard spot, this is essentially a 4-guard lineup, just a different iteration of it. And again, you're running 2 point guards on the floor at the same time. This is the equivalent of Rick Carlisle liking what he saw from TJ McConnell as a starter and deciding that I'm going to start TJ McConnell next to Nembhard at the same time. He would never do something like that because it's idiotic unless his team is decimated by injuries and he has no other options at the shooting guard spot. When Nembhard comes back into the equation, TJ McConnell, thank you. You filled in admirably. Time to go back to your role as a bench player and help us in that way. This is all Steve Kerr had to do. Get Pat Spencer to run the second unit. But no, he couldn't do that. He just had to abuse this situation where Pat Spencer was playing really well, and he just didn't have the heart in him to do the right thing and get him off the starting lineup. And instead, he forced the starting lineup to be completely compromised. And the Warriors, of course, allow comically easy looks because Steph Curry and Pat Spencer are interchanging in various situations, forced to constantly guard 6'9" Jaden McDaniels. And Jaden McDaniels is getting comically easy looks to start the game. And guess what? Newsflash, with zero protection, Pat Spencer is a bad defender. And in these lineups, Steve Kerr is making Spencer look bad. Spencer was a -15 in this game. If you want to play Spencer, you have to play him at point guard and you have to make sure the defense around him is correct. We've already seen what that looks like over the last 3 games, did we not? Okay, so I knew the Warriors defense was immediately compromised, but at least when the bench unit comes in, they'll do a better job. Except Steve Kerr decided to mess up on that too, and he decided to sit Gui Santos and not play him at all in that first quarter. Gui Santos didn't see playing time until 4 minutes had gone by in the second quarter, and he played like 4 or 5 minutes in that second quarter. The reason Santos has been effective over the last 3 games is because he's been getting proper actual rotational minutes. After playing all of the fourth quarter against OKC when the Warriors made a giant comeback, after playing 27 minutes against the Cavaliers, including the closing minutes where he helped the team win the game on the road, and then playing 20 minutes against the Bulls in a complete and utter blowout, Santos is suddenly nowhere to be found. And why is that? It's because Steve Kerr decided that all of his guards take priority over Santos. He had 10 guys in rotation in this game. 7 of them were guards. The tallest guy among those guards was Moses Moody at 6'5". It was Quinton Post, Trace Jackson Davis, Jimmy Butler, and 7 guards. I don't care what level you are coaching the game of basketball. If you think that that is okay, you are clinically insane. And so the Warriors were allowing the Timberwolves, without Anthony Edwards again, to shoot 60% halfway through that first quarter. And ultimately, the Timberwolves ended up shooting 54% from the field because they are allowing comically easy looks like this, where Naz Reid is constantly seeing a guard in front of him. Like when Naz Reid, who is a Warriors killer and has been, sees Moses Moody in front of him. What do you think is going to happen there? And what do you think would happen to the Warriors if Naz Reid saw Pods in front of him? And what do you think would happen to the Warriors if Naz Reid saw Melton in front of him? Now you are giving this guy all the confidence in the world. He's getting comically easy looks, and that is how NBA players gain confidence. You're supposed to shut the paint off like they have been doing, like I've been saying for the last 3 games. The reason the Warriors have been so dominant on defense is because they prioritize centers and got an actual power forward into the game in Gui Santos. And that is obviously especially true against an especially big team like the Timberwolves, where they have McDaniels at 6'9", Gobert at 7'1", Julius Randle at 6'9", Naz Reid at 6'9". Everybody in their front court is 6'9", for crying out loud. So the Warriors should have been able to stop and dominate the Timberwolves in this game, but instead they allowed all these comically easy points, and it gave the Timberwolves the confidence that they shouldn't have had because Steve Kerr sabotaged his own team once again. And why is that exactly? Why is it that Steve Kerr would sit Gui Santos so that he can play a 3-guard lineup and a 4-guard lineup? I think the answer is pretty simple. He favors and loves Buddy Hield and Pods. And he will literally compromise the team's defense to run these guards over a forward that is indispensable and is absolutely needed for this team to have success, especially with Draymond out of the equation. Another winnable game, completely wasted, thrown away by Steve Kerr. Of course he does these things as soon as Steph Curry comes back into the equation. It's almost like he wants Steph Curry to fail. It's almost like he wants to sabotage Steph Curry. It's almost like he wants to make it look like Steph Curry coming back into the equation is somehow bad for the Warriors. Man, if Steve Kerr was running an army or a nation, that nation or army would be crumbled and destroyed completely and utterly. This guy is unfit to lead. I feel like everybody and their moms could see that Steve Kerr is unfit to lead this team at this point. Like I said, the game of basketball in the NBA is grueling. It is a physical battle. It takes a physical toll on you to play the game of basketball at this level. Proper size is absolutely vital. And if you somehow find a way to disrespect that size and think that that size somehow doesn't matter, well, this is what happens to the Warriors. They get embarrassed, they get humiliated, they end up losing games that they shouldn't lose, and guys end up getting hurt over time because they end up getting too taxed and they're completely playing out of position constantly. How shameful is that Steve Kerr will not hesitate to play a 3-guard lineup and a 4-guard lineup and sometimes even a 5-guard lineup, but his puny little brain can't even fathom to think that maybe against a big team like this, they keep having an advantage inside the paint. Maybe get 2 of your bigs on the floor at the same time at some point. Who said that Quinton Post and TJD can't be on the floor at the same time? The last time those 2 guys were playing on the floor together at the same time, they outplayed Jokic and Aaron Gordon. And if Post and TJD can outplay the tandem of Jokic and Aaron Gordon, what else can they do against other teams that are bigger? These are the things that this imbecile Steve Kerr refuses to explore to any extent, even though he'll explore literally all day and night with all kinds of guard combinations that make 0 sense whatsoever. There's no defense out there, and any coach that does not prioritize the defense is unfit to lead any basketball team. Now I'll get to some of the nuances of what happened in this game. First, I want to talk about more incompetency from Steve Kerr. There was a moment in the third quarter where McDaniels threw Steph Curry to the ground. The superstar of the Warriors, Steph Curry, gets thrown to the ground by McDaniels, and the ref somehow calls a foul on Steph Curry. And Steve Kerr, like the fool that he is, just looks on with this weird look of like, hey, what's that about? How about you protect your superstar and challenge that damn call like you should? Why do you even need a replay on this? What the hell are you watching? So instead of the Warriors getting possession back, the Timberwolves end up scoring 2 points on the play. I mean, there were a bunch of times where these refs were being real wonky. There was a moment early in the fourth quarter, it's a tie game. Potts fights for an offensive rebound, but the ball goes out on the Timberwolves. It is clearly out on the Timberwolves if you watch this play, but the refs don't know what happened and decides to just call it out of bounds on the Warriors. And Steve Kerr is going, Guy, if you clearly saw what happened, how about you challenge that play? It's a close game. You have to value these possessions. Now I want to show you a few quick possessions where Gui Santos was in the game in that second quarter, and he was making a positive impact on both ends of the floor. So first of all, on this play, Spencer gets beat on the pick and roll, and Santos meets the penetrator and forcing him to kick the ball back out. That would maybe not be the case if this was a guard instead of Santos. Okay, now Jaden McDaniels is attacking Buddy Hield, but he sees once again the paint is clogged off because Gui Santos is there, so he dishes off again. And at this point, the ball gets out to Dante DiVincenzo. Post is covering Randall in the corner, so Gui Santos is boxing out Rudy Gobert. And look how Santos is able to completely get Rudy Gobert out of position, and this ends up being an easy rebound for Pat Spencer. Are you gonna see what Gui Santos just did in the stat sheet? No, you won't. But that is the value of having an actual power forward next to Quinton Post so that he's not on an island by himself against a big team across the board and he can't do it by himself. And maybe Naz Reid doesn't get whatever the hell he wants in the paint if he had Gui Santos on him, who would have at least given him some resistance. You put a guard on a guy like Naz Reid, you may as well just gift wrap 2 points for Naz Reid. I mean, some of this stuff, the way the Timberwolves are scoring, is just completely ridiculous. You allow points like this, you give the confidence to the other team. And once you give confidence to the other team and you let them know that they can get whatever they want inside the paint, that's how you lose to any team in the NBA. Like, you see Potts stuck guarding Randall, and I am just losing my mind. Again, the Warriors are just too small. The more guards you have on the floor, the more likely that one of them is gonna end up on a switch and transition against a guy like Reid or Randall. So Randall sees food, he starts attacking, Quinton Post is there to help, and then he dishes off to Naz Reid, who's being checked by Melton. So then Quinton Post is forced to go over there to help, and he does force him into a miss. But Potts is still on an island against Randall, so of course Randall gets this offensive rebound and just puts it right back up like nobody is there. And you have to ask yourself, does Potts really need to be out there? Or does Buddy Hield need to be out here? And does there need to be 3 guards on the floor here at the same time with no Steph Curry? It's Melton, Potts, Buddy Hield against a big lineup. Shouldn't it just be Potts and Melton and have Gui Santos in there so that you have more size, so that it's Jimmy Butler, Santos, and Post? No, we can't get that. Or it could even be Melton, Hield, Butler, Santos, and Post. But no, Steve Kerr just has to run his guards out there all day and night and prioritize them over his size that has been helping his team look like one of the best defensive teams in the entire league. And the sad thing is that Santos, even offensively, was doing great things out there. Look at this high pick and pop action between Pat Spencer and Quinton Post. Pat Spencer penetrates, Quinton Post is open, but guess who else is open? Gui Santos, because he's cutting while Naz Reid is ball watching and he gets a layup here. Or how about this pick and roll between Steph Curry and Gui Santos? Gui Santos cuts to the rim, sees Gobert, and instantly passes to Quinton Post, who's wide open in the corner. And unfortunately, Post had a rough shooting night. He ends up missing this one. Santos is right there though, and he's able to tip the ball out for another opportunity. This doesn't happen if Santos is not on the floor. So the ball goes to Steph Curry, who drives and dishes to Quinton Post once again, and this time he knocks it down. And by the way, Trayce Jackson-Davis had a pretty good game off the bench. 8 points, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks in just 15 minutes of play. He needed to play more. He needed to be in these bigger lineups next to Quinton Post and giving him the help that he needs, because he's faced up against a bunch of guys with a bunch of size and a center that is bigger than him. Somebody needs to tell Steve Kerr that sometimes it's okay to go with a bigger lineup. So here, for example, this is another iteration of a 3-guard / 4-guard lineup. Potts gets screened out of this play, so Trayce has to be there to help. The ball goes to McDaniels. Melton is beat because he's out of position. McDaniels attacks the baseline. Trayce is forced to help again, and when Trayce helps on this play, what happens? There are 2 guards on the floor, now forced to have to deal with Rudy Gobert. It's 6'2" DeAnthony Melton and 6'4" Pods. And if it was just one of the guards on the floor, then it would just be Melton and Santos, or Pods and Santos. And if Santos was in the position that Melton was just in, he's intercepting this pass. This pass is not just getting right through to Rudy Gobert. And now these midgets can do nothing against Gobert, and they're forced to foul. You guys remember that other play I showed you a little little while ago where Santos was able to box out Rudy Gobert, right? And Quinten Post, all things considered, was doing a really good job whenever he had to just individually box out Rudy Gobert without having to try to help everybody else out at the same time. Rudy Gobert got a bunch of dunks against Quinten Post in this game, and that's because Quinten Post is constantly trying to help everybody constantly, and he's not in good enough of a position to be able to stop Rudy Gobert at the same time when they're just lobs straight going up to him. Oh, Quinten Post has been looking amazing on the defensive end of the floor? Well, let me just put out a lineup out there and see if he can handle this lineup. And well, for all the compliments that I have given Quinten Post throughout the course of this season, I actually made a very important video about him last night. So if you haven't seen that, be sure to check that out. But even me, as soon as I saw that starting lineup, I knew that Quinten Post was in position to fail. Now let's fast forward real quick to that fourth quarter. Despite the absolutely awful sabotage by Steve Kerr, Moses Moody got into the game late in that third quarter and into the fourth quarter, and he was making a difference out there on both ends of the floor. Just being tenacious out there, playing with a lot of energy. He did a lot of good things on the stat sheet, getting multiple steals, stealing offensive rebounds, hitting mid-range jump shots, and did a bunch of things that helped the Warriors get a lot of momentum back. So the closing lineup ended up being Steph Curry, Melton, Moody, Butler, and Quinten Post. And you know what? Under normal circumstances, I would take that lineup. At least everybody in that lineup is capable of defending. There's not a hole in there like a Pat Spencer, a Buddy Hield, Pods, all these things. If only Steve Kerr would care enough to do these things throughout the course of the game so that they're not in position to try to have to come back and overcome his deficits. And they did have a chance to try to overcome those deficits, but they just weren't sharp enough. There was a lot to overcome. It gets tiring, it gets taxing. Next thing you know, Jimmy Butler misses a makeable free throw, and Steph Curry also misses a makeable free throw. So they're just missing a little bit of the details here and there. There was one play where Quinten Post was wide open from the three-point line. He should have just launched it with confidence. Instead, he just froze and looked at the rim for like 2-3 seconds, and the defense finally started to recover on him a little bit, and then he finally shoots and he ended up missing the shot. If he made that shot, maybe the outcome could have been potentially different. And that is the kind of thing that a guy like Quinten Post can learn from. He, I guess, needed that experience. But am I gonna blame Quinten Post for that? No, of course not, because the Warriors should have had a comfortable lead in that fourth quarter, which they would have had if it wasn't for Steve Kerr and his senseless lineups. Gui Santos got 6 minutes in this game. It is absolutely inexcusable. Why? So Pat Spencer can get 28 minutes in the starting lineup in a broken defense next to Steph Curry, so that Buddy Hield can play 19 minutes, so that Pods can play 23 minutes? No, one of those guards have to sacrifice their minutes so that Gui Santos gets into the rotation so that you have proper size on the floor. And it's just so sad and shameful. Steph Curry had a marvelous game, 39 points on 28 shots. First game back, didn't skip a beat. He was awesome. But of course, we cannot appreciate it because it comes in a loss, in an absolutely disgusting loss. Steve Kerr should have some shame. You are at war. And instead of choosing your best soldier, you chose the two girls that you liked instead and compromised everything for your team. And obviously, I'm not calling Buddy Hield and Pods girls. What I'm saying is he chose the two guys that he feels is prettier than Gui Santos. And that is freaking disgusting. He is unfit to lead this team. Again, I appreciated all the things that Pat Spencer was able to do, but he better be out of that starting lineup for good moving forward. It was cute, and it cost the Warriors a game that they should have won. Either bring Pat Spencer off the bench and have him be the backup point guard like Steve Kerr should be doing, but he just can't do it because he just can't bench his pretty little Pods. Either way, one of them obviously has to take a seat. They just can't be on the floor at the same time. It'll completely compromise the Warriors. Freaking idiot imbecile. That's all I got for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Steph Curry is the GOAT. Blah, blah, blah.